Hey, happy Friday, everyone. Happy early fourth. I just wanted to put a video together because I've seen a lot of information out there on LinkedIn and other places that people are maybe haven't really had a chance to work too much with like AI and the newer ways that systems are being set up. So I wanted to just put together like a super low hanging, tiny explanation for how I think software systems are being assembled today and why it's put so much pressure on software as a service as like a business model, and then where I think there's like new forms of value that can be considered, perhaps. And like always, I don't get everything right. And so, I'm just going to talk through it. I'm also on my first cup of coffee, so I need like 10 other cups of coffee to really crush this. But no, I hope everyone's having a wonderful day and had a great week. But let me jump into this. So, a couple of the things that I've noticed is the stack has changed, and it's kind of reorganized where complexity and value exists at. So one of the most challenging things, and I'll throw this out here early so you can be excited to maybe listen to how I'm decomposing this and reassembling this stuff. But anyone can generate an application now with a simple license to a frontier model. And you can generate an application in a more secure, sovereign way if you deploy it locally or run it via, Basetin or some other provider where you have more control over the model. Basetin's essentially like a really cool model gateway for people, but it's more than that. Like they've really optimize it so you can use open source models and not have to own the hardware, and they've kind of priced it really nicely. But really, it's think about how much like internal software cost from like a time, philosophy, resource, everything perspective. Well, that's all been kind of demolished in this new era of AI, which is very frustrating for a lot of people, right? And I think the reason why a lot of these AI pilots or these AI rollouts within larger enterprises fail isn't because the AI is either, good or not good. It's because a lot of these enterprises still struggle from the same things that are causing them to not execute the way that they expected, right? There's a lot of like consensus that needs to be achieved, which is impossible when you have like 100 people trying to make sense of or answer a question that they have, and all of them have varying context, and they're trying to look smart and posture, and like no one's just actually trying to solve the problem. Like that will make your AI rollout awful. Another thing is like people not understanding maybe where the value of like these models kind of exists. And so they'll see that it can produce words and they'll be like, oh, this is great. Let me create a LinkedIn post with it. And then it falls flat and it's like kind of weird and cringe sounding. Or they'll be like, hey, let me do email marketing with it. And they'll like, burst send a bunch of emails that nobody responds to because it looks like AI slop. Or they'll like share a strategy document internally and it's a bunch of like fake, hey, we should go talk to Brad Pitt and ask him. It's just insane, right? Like, and so people get so distracted by the fact that like AI can generate words, when that is really cool, and I think it was like an impressive thing to launch with. But really, AI is like the ultimate syntax generator. It generates contextually relevant code extremely well, right? Code doesn't rely on emotional nuance, where like imperfection is interesting, and there's aesthetic and there's vibe and there's all these things, right? That makes the output and the grade of the output really difficult to achieve like the outcomes you want from like a marketing perspective, a positioning perspective. So I really focus a lot of where I like to point AI at, and don't get me wrong, I think there are creative use cases for it, but I like to point it at syntax. I like to point it at generating code. And I like to view the world like everything eventually will be software defined hardware. Think about embedded engineering and software defined radios, like all these things, right? Everything has some type of schema that represents it now. And so, including philosophies and compliance, I think about OSCAL from NIST, and how that represents kind of a security posture and the security controls, and now that can be like a machine interface. And so I really kind of like to take this crazy new capability, generative AI, and point it at generating syntax, and then thinking about the world as being software defined, and then being really honest about what are the things that are going to make or break a AI rollout. And a lot of them are kind of overlooked. And so let me start with the kind of breakdown of my diagram here, and I'll explain kind of how I put it all together. I made it super simple and probably missing layers. People are going to be like, Rob, you're insane. You missed all these different things. Well, let's start at this top layer here. The top layer is, I have it written out here, ephemeral application that could change and reconfigure dynamically. What I mean by that is like, we used to purchase SaaS products, right? Because it was very difficult to put the entire software cake together, if you will. Think about something, think about any type of like project management Kanban solution. It can move left to right between different columns dynamically, via WebSockets. People could see it update dynamically on their screens when collaborating. There were all these subtle features. They can leave notes, they can enrich things, they can set their parameters about their account and, what their profile picture looked like, all these different things, right? All of those things were individually unique because an organization would have to recreate them and hire the talent to maintain them. And now, like, you could generate all of those things and then set up, time-based events that occur every so often to maintain them. So it's like really crazy. A lot of the value for like a static application that has a set of features that gets a new set of features every single like, day, week, month, whatever, that whole paradigm's changed because you can like regenerate entire applications in hours. And I'm not just like being bold and saying that. Everyone knows that kind of now. A year ago, I was kind of calling out, how disruptive this was going to be. And I think, if you think back to last summer, last spring, people were still like, I don't know. It's like the output from AI is kind of weird and gross. And like you can generate a file, but you have to like quality control it and kind of integrate it with something like the management of the output is like too overwhelming. It's easier just to write it from scratch, which I disagreed with. I mean, you could generate massive files that were like 99% good. You just like couldn't one shot things in Claude Code, but like it was still extremely from a performance perspective, like 5 to 10x your time per individual engineer or whoever. And so that's just going to ramp up. It's going to get even better too. So I think like the idea of like a static application's disappearing. There's even a lot of situations where I'm like, oh my goodness, I kind of like don't really like this workflow, or I don't like what I named this very critical component to my application that ends up being a topic or a label that's like across my entire app. I mean, like thousands of records that are related to this thing. It's super high risk. Changing that 3 years ago would have been this like 6 month enterprise shuffle and everyone would have been super nervous about it. I mean, it's literally something I one shot. And after a 10-minute kind of Claude goes through my entire code base, uses grep commands to like pull the different keywords and just like surgically changes everything. I mean, it's insane. I just said Claude because that's what I used recently, but I use kind of all the different coding agents because I'm always just trying to see which one's the best bang for the buck. And it's phenomenal. But right now, applications are almost worth nothing, right? Like they are throwaway. They should be created, time boxed. All the value has moved over to like workflows and also the context layer and sort of the orchestration layer as well. But I think this is a little bit more static. But I mean, static's maybe the wrong word because a lot of these things might be static. This is probably the most dynamic and interesting layer to maintain. That's like a new input now that context is a form of data and quality. So it's really like kind of fascinating, I think. And I'm also like a total layman, so I apologize if I use like the wrong terms for these things. Hardcore machine learning OGs beat me up if I say the wrong thing. But so anyway, so yeah, I think applications, there obviously we need some type of interface to be able to work through, and it could be like a legit UI, it could be voice related, it could be any type of experience we need to interface with data and eventually interface with our material environments. But like this is very different. It's sad. I'll go online and see ads for like different software as a service platforms or certain types of databases that can now just be like literally vibe engineered, like a completely bespoke one that an organization can manage, and it's not even like a hard chore to manage anymore. It's just like this little thing that you update once or twice a day or a couple times a week, and you integrate it with like this vulnerabilities / security data source. I mean, it's crazy how everything's been moved around and changed. And I'll kind of also just throw some ideas and theories I have, and like also questions that I'm like constantly trying to add out there as I explain this stuff. So this is like what we used to call like the applications layer. There's one other box over here that I didn't really talk about, and that's raw output. Raw output is, instead of creating an application, you can actually design a system that generates and produces a design styled or just machine readable output. Like I have one fun example is this like blog experiment I ran, Progoff. So I created this like really basic, future blog. It's really kind of a cool way to see what agents end up producing creatively with like a constant feed from RSS feeds, and then also to use as like a backlinking platform for like your prominent sites, and it can reference different articles. But like one of the cool things is like these are essentially little kind of like payloads, if you will. So if you kind of look at this diagram, this, even though it's an application that's consuming these things, like every day it produces 3 to 4 blog outputs. And so that's just to me like a form of raw output rather than an application itself. And then it shows this is like the sort of back end, because agents just want to consume, they consume structured text a lot more efficiently, from a token perspective, from like an understanding and reduced hallucination and accuracy perspective. It's really fascinating. So that's just one example of like raw output and how it can actually represent itself through a UI or something. It could also just be like an email, like if you were to just like email this raw text to somebody. And so, the application layer is like these ephemeral, constantly configuring and reconfiguring and adapting applications and deleting. Like if you don't need it, you can just purge it and reassemble a new application that does something better than it originally did. And then the raw output. And the next layer is the context layer, and that also, or it's kind of, this is the agent layer in my opinion. You have your orchestration, which is the agents, think N8N, your custom agent build. If you're using like Claude Code, they have their own kind of agents and agent harness on top of their actual coding experience. freaking cursor. There's a ton, right? Those aren't models. That's like the orchestration. That's like the agentic experience where, there's different files that offer situational, hey, if this is the case, then, leverage this type of protocol or activity to be able to achieve this outcome. And then, once you achieve that outcome, scrutinize the outcome and make sure that it's correct. Like all these different kind of optimization, efficiency things. It's where data is introduced, and then where data is routed to be generated at the inference layer. And so it's really kind of cool. You see a lot of interesting things at this layer, like light LLM, which allows like you to have multiple forms of inference where based on the specific activity or the specific agent that's being utilized for an outcome, you can route the experiences or prompts to different models. There's also failover with light LLM where, if you go to route to prompt and the API gives you an error code, it can like route it to either a local model that's running or a different kind of API slash frontier model. So that's like the orchestration. That's like the agent layer, but it's also the context layer for your expectation files. Think like your claude.md or your security.md, your design.md, your roadmap.markdown. MD is markdown. And so it's essentially like the manifestos that agents or the orchestration is interpreting before they take an action. And part of the orchestration is, and the configuration of the orchestration is like, hey, you will reference these files before you do X, Y, and Z. And so it's really interesting. And there isn't, I mean, this is a super, you can really build this out depending on the system to like what components you're using and how it interfaces with the raw output and the applications that are generated. I mean, I'm freakishly oversimplifying a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of complexity between these two layers or three layers really, and with the inference. But what I like to highlight here is like, automation philosophies and operations really kind of are the inexpensive but expensive component to these systems where it's literally just people um, brokering the way that they expect their systems to work and really identifying the types of problems that they need to solve in their organization that different types of automation or generative AI can address in like a reasonable and dependable way and cost effective way. And so I think this is the layer that a lot of people sleep on because I think they're wary of a lot of like framework ideation kind of consulting scams that they've experienced over the last decade where it's like you're not telling me anything spectacular or something that I didn't know. I could have just like read a book or I read a blog that was more sophisticated than the input that you're providing. So I think, but it stinks, right? Because that like rejection and that overlooking or minimization of a particular component of these new systems, arguably the most important component, ends up being like dismissed or delayed or not incorporated early enough. And then people run these like, AI infrastructure pilots or these AI rollout pilots or even just workflow pilots where it's like, hey, I'm going to consume this like simple AI feature within our kind of office suite and it's not doing the things I wanted. And it's like, yeah, it's because you didn't really anchor on the things that we've always struggled with, which is like, getting feedback from the people that are closest to the problem, really understanding the problems and whether what you've done in the past is the most valuable approach to solving them. Strategy, doing competitive analysis, all the things that are like, we need to move faster. We need to kind of eliminate this issue or this, stovepipe pipe within our organization. Um, and that layer is where a lot of the chaos happens. I'm going to color it red because I think this is where a lot of the pilots and the dissatisfaction with AI and some of these new builds exists. And it's so sad because it's just like a change of perspective. It has nothing to do with the architecture, the systems, the data, the money. It's like just knowledge and the ability to work with a team and be able to lay out exactly what you need to do. And so I love this layer. And obviously I'm biased. I'm like a hardcore, UX designer, traditionally, whatever. So, I really think from an experience engineering perspective, a lot of the value is at this layer, whether enterprises want to admit it or not. And also just on a side note, I love going down rabbit holes. I think a lot of value is also in like creative and divergent thinkers at a macro institutional level. Like divergent thinking is the most important variable that can go into a like very sequentially minded super intelligent model. Like I think because they can out sequence any logic, and so any type of like unexpected chaotic input creates this multiplier effect. And I've seen it in the wild. I've seen like extremely divergent thinkers come up with like you know ridiculous generational R&D concepts that are like feasible and proven well way before they're sponsored publicly. And so like if people can create these opportunities within their organizations to harvest divergent, unique, completely random and almost bizarre information and data to creatively put into their, strategy models, their strategic AI builds, to help do kind of R&D forecasting. I think that is just like a superpower now, because like the kind of capacity and time is no longer a constraint. You can move, especially for software organizations, as fast as you want, as fast as you can process relevant data that's unique enough to be like purchased by another entity. And so it's really kind of cool when you start trying to pipeline new inputs, new thoughts, new perspectives, and you create an entire experience around that. I've uh, so to go down the rabbit hole of rabbit holes, right? I think like enterprise journaling is going to be a very, very powerful thing. No one likes surveys, right? So like to try to like make it not be a survey experience and more just like a genuine, self-reflective, incentivized somehow, either monetarily or with some other type of kind of kudos. I think journaling is so powerful within organizations. And it was like a year and a half ago, I wanted to create an entire business offering for like enterprise journaling and business journaling as like a contextual data set for AI builds within organizations. And I just thought it was like too early. I mean, people didn't really trust or think AI was going to be as big as big as it is now, or as reliable as it's become. And so I don't know. I kind of avoided that, or just ignored it and moved on. But so I think this automation philosophies and operations, this is where people can really get their money back. And this is where people can really kind of create institutional buy-in and real sponsorships and get people to advocate for the way that automation is being composed. And this is where I think like a lot of the arguments around layoffs and stuff. Oh shoot, I might have been covering it. I don't know. I'm such a weirdo, but I think a lot of the conversations around like layoffs and stuff get lost at this layer. It's like you're laying people off for like really kind of lame workflows that you've kind of designed that aren't complete. And it's also so expensive to find their backfill, right? Rather than maintaining that institutional knowledge and cross training them into a new AI native role where they're providing like essentially data labeling or context labeling or something like that. There's been a lot of subject matter expertise conversations I've had where it's like, oh my goodness, we just kind of replaced this like manual effort where someone goes and deploys hardware and takes a reading on the hardware. Now the hardware kind of is just static and it like constantly streams to a specific data source. We don't really need them to be out there and configuring this whole thing. But like instead of completely eliminating those positions, I think cross training them into contextual labelers that can like update this context layer for enterprises is like a really, really awesome thing to do, because you again, going back to where the value is these days, just like how value disappeared at like the application layer, well, value really kind of multiplied at the loyalty and context layers. And so it's hard to get those two things and rely on them. So if you have people who are like in your organization that are like down for the cause, work really hard, super sophisticated, and want to stay kind of contributing to your ecosystem, find a way to get to transition them from like the operational layer to the context layer if their specific operational role might be better fit as some type of like agent sequence now or something. And also they can be a part of the equation, have them monitor it, have them become like the human governance and judgment behind the execution for a long time. And once it's running perfectly, they can create the kind of backup SOP as well, standard operating procedure to like, if it goes down, how do you kind of re-augment the workflow with a human in the loop type experience that's dependable and reliable and tested, and it's tested quarterly or whatever, just in case there is some type of crisis. Yeah, so I think that's like applications are ephemeral. Software as a service, unless there's some other type of moat like data or social or something else, are becoming like super like not very valuable. And I think convenience is still another thing. Like if you could just build something for people that they don't feel like kind of going down the path of like having to host, the application and do all these different things. It's become so easy though with like these serverless solutions like Vercel and Supabase and Baseatin for the model layer, the inference layer and stuff. So yeah, that's wild. I think every organization can be building their entire stack now in a sovereign way. So I'm really excited about that. Context and orchestration. This is where a lot of the complexity is, in addition to automation philosophies and operations. And then inference layer is another really quirky one. So here's the kind of final layer, or I guess the final layer that I'll go deep about, just because I'm at the compute layer. I haven't done a ton of things with hardware. Really, the inference layer, I think there's a couple of different options here. Like I just mentioned, you can deploy models locally and get your inference locally, which I think is going to be a spectacular emerging thing. And it's not even emerging. A lot of people are actually doing it, but I think it's just going to get better and better. So definitely want to explore it. I just haven't gone down that path. But at the inference, at the like the cloud layer, there's a lot of options, right? You can create, a couple of different ways that your system interfaces with models, and you can create a business wise. I mean, you could build an application that you're really kind of offering value at like the context and orchestration layer via model context protocol. Like I created a CRM tool, and my whole thing was like I didn't want to create some wrap around an API where every single thing that people were doing was costing me tokens and I was charging them, the difference and trying to make margin on that difference, whatever. Or, maybe it was just like a fixed price license, but the assumption was like if they probably use it this much, I'll be able to make this much money off of it. I didn't want to go down that path. That's where a lot of things started with simple like API integrations with ChatGPT. But what I did is I set up a model context protocol server per tenant. So if someone stands up their own CRM that I kind of built out and managed the backend for, they get their own MCP for their organization, and they can interface with their enterprise logins via OAuth for Claude or ChatGPT or whatever. So I think that's a really great workflow. And so you're not playing the tokens game as much. Like you still are, but it's like abstracted behind their own licenses. Like I just charge, whatever, $5, either free, $5, $10, whatever kind of license cost that isn't tied to any token usage. But there's kind of like, a license cost, and you let them kind of hit your model that you have set up and configured, and then some like, design layer stuff in between their prompts to your API to the model that you're managing for them. But then there's also another cool kind of setup with something like Basetin where you can go back to the wrapper experience, but instead of wrapping, a standard frontier model that might have a really expensive token cost, you can route them to open source models, and you can do a lot of really cool things from a governance perspective with the open source models. It's usually like, anywhere from 50 to 90% cheaper with the right setups. You can really you can tune those models really efficiently. It's cool. It's really interesting. So there's a lot of options out there. It's kind of where you think you want to be selling value at what layer. And yeah, and it could be a combination of layers, and it usually is, but I think that is awesome. And then one other thing, I guess, one other like business scenario too is like the whole services software, which is like the new thing where it's kind of, I think tied to, or, the orchestration, raw output, maybe a little of the context, but you're essentially selling, the outcome. And usually it's like people renting, pieces of your agents, and your agents have all of this interesting context and maybe access to proprietary data sources where based on an enterprise's needs, they can just purchase the outcome from the agentic sequences. And so that's another really cool emerging model. I haven't gone deep and really researched any companies that have done it. I kind of do with my personal business Adjective a kind of version of this a little bit, but it's definitely more with like me in the loop, human in the loop style. It's kind of more like productized services. If you're familiar with Design Joy, supercharged with a services software type workflow where I can expose an agent to an organization. I usually just control my agents to produce compelling outcomes in the way of fundable artifacts like proposals and, pitches or, different ways to position products and stuff. So yeah, this is cool. Just wanted to throw a video together on Friday and just, wish everyone a wonderful 4th of July and a really great weekend. Please reach out if you have any questions. Would love to hear what your thoughts are and kind of what projects you're working on. Later, everyone.